At the end of November 1939, this poster appeared on the streets of Warsaw. It warned the population that as of the 1st of December 1939, all Jews had to wear distinguishing marks to identify themselves as Jews whenever they were outdoors. Any Jew disobeying this order would be severely punished. The poster is signed by the head of the Warsaw district, Dr. Fischer. Thus did Ludwig Fischer, otherwise a well-educated lawyer who could speak English and some French, begin the destruction of the second largest Jewish community in the world. The name of Ludwig Fischer is perhaps more than any other associated with Nazi terror in Warsaw. As the governor of the Warsaw district of the General Government of Poland from 1939 to 1945, his name appears on many posters warning of and announcing death sentences and mass killings. In this video, I shall look at his career as well as his post-war fate. Ludwig Fischer was born on the 16th of April 1905 in Kaiserslautern, the son of strict Catholic parents. He attended elementary school for 3¼ years and high school at Kaiserslautern for 9 years. He then studied law and political science for 5 years in Heidelberg, Munich, Würzburg and Erlangen. After completing his state examination, he received his doctorate in law from the University of Erlangen in 1929. The title of his dissertation, published in Munich in 1930, was "The Failure to Report a Crime." From 1928 to 1932, he did work experience in Munich and Kaiserslautern. As a student, Fischer had been involved in the Rhineland independence movement, but by the mid-1920s he moved towards the extreme right. Fischer joined the National Socialist German Workers' Party on the 20th of May 1926, membership number 36499, and in February 1929 the SA in Munich. There he lived in Obermenzing, Lindenallee 43, later Rathochstrasse 87. On the 1st of March 1931 he joined the Reich Legal Office of the National Socialist German Workers' Party. There he took up the position of deputy head of the legal department. It was here that he met Hans Frank, later to be the head of the general government, the occupied part of Poland. Their career paths were to coincide, and despite occasional arguments between the two of them, Frank took Fischer with him all the way, and I mean all the way. Hans Frank had been born on the 23rd of May 1900 in Karlsruhe, thus he just managed to miss fighting in World War I, although he was drafted into the infantry. He did, however, join the Freikorps Epp, which played a major role in the suppression of the Munich Soviet Republic. Whilst he was in Munich, Frank joined the Ethno-Nationalist Tula Society, where he met Anton Drexler, who was then the head of the German Workers' Party, the DAP. In 1919 he became a member of the DAP, thus he may have been a member of the party longer than Hitler, and he was possibly present at the first meeting that Hitler actually attended. Of course, the DAP, the German Workers' Party, was to become NSDAP, the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Frank studied law at Munich and Kiel. He participated in the beer hall putsch, after which he fled to Italy. He was able to return to Germany once charges were dropped. According to the biographical information in the Reichstag Handbook of 1932, Hans Frank was a member of the teaching staff at Munich Technical University, Economics Department. In the NSDAP, he became second assessor of the Investigation Arbitration Committee of the party Reich leadership in 1927. Frank joined his father's Munich law firm, which he later took over, and defended Nazi thugs and functionaries in the Weimar Republic. In 1928 he founded the National Socialist German Lawyers Association. This was the first professional organisation of the NSDAP, and he headed it. In 1929 Hitler appointed him head of the NSDAP legal department. By 1933 he had appeared in more than 2,400 court cases as a legal representative for the Nazis, including supporting Hitler in around 40 trials. In 1931 Frank was commissioned to refute claims about Hitler's Jewish ancestry. This made him an intimate expert on Hitler's ancestry and was possibly the only person to see all the relevant documents, some of which later disappeared. Now, Hitler did want to hide his ancestry, but it was not because he was Jewish. But I shall talk about that in a totally separate video. In 1930, Frank was elected to be a member of the Reichstag. Thus, the relationship with someone who had been so close to Hitler for so many years before the Nazis came to power was of great help in the career of Ludwig Fischer. Ludwig Fischer was promoted to SA Standartenführer of Department 3 at the staff of the Supreme SA Leadership, OSAF. After the National Socialists seized power, or should I say granted power, as they were given it by conservative elements, he was appointed to the Government Council in 1933. He joined the newly founded Academy for German Law in Munich under Reich Minister Hans Frank and held a position as Chief Service Officer there. Fischer became a member of the Reichstag in November 1937, representing Constituency 23, Düsseldorf West. It needs, of course, to be pointed out that the Reichstag was uniquely staffed by Nazis. On the 1st of May 1937, he was promoted to SA Oberführer. In 1937, Fischer completed his military service, somewhat late in life, as he was now 32. The following year, he became Chief of Staff of the Reich Legal Office of the National Socialist German Workers' Party. As the Wehrmacht was mobilised for the attack on Poland, Fischer was called up. However, he didn't participate in the war. As Hans Frank was to be appointed Governor-General of the occupied part of Poland, being based in Krakow, on the 29th of September 1939 he requested Fischer's release from the army, and on the 26th of October 1939 made him head of the Warsaw district, one of the 4 in the general government. As the head of the former Polish capital, this was a very important position. He was thus directly subordinate to the Governor-General Hans Frank, although as time progressed he usually delegated his deputy Hummel to meetings in Krakow. Ludwig Fischer now held the power of life and death over millions of people. Fischer was unusually tall for the times at 184 centimetres and of quite slender build. He was married to Friedel Koblitz, with whom he had a daughter, and a second daughter was to be born in Warsaw in 1940. The elder daughter went to a German school in Warsaw where she learned, among other things, both English and Polish. He loved family life and cultural entertainment, above all music. He often organised musical evenings and played the cello himself. Like Goering, he was also fond of hunting, and he was able to do this in the forests in the region of Warsaw. In January 1944, this was almost the cause of his death when the resistance learned of his hobby. Before the war, he had visited the United States, Denmark and Hungary. Some of these were official trips with Hans Frank. He lived in the Brühl Palace in Warsaw, in the former apartment of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Josef Beck. As he did not want a long journey to work, The Brühl Palace also became his office and housed various officers relating to the functioning of the Warsaw district, but not the police and Gestapo, which was based in Alei Schucha. The palace was located close to the old town on Piłsudski Square, renamed Adolf Hitler Platz in 1940. One of the members of his staff from October 1939 was Vienna-born Teodora Żukowska, who, as Milena, was an agent of the Home Army. She provided the resistance with a huge amount of information, including the private address of the higher SS and police leader for the Warsaw district, Franz Kutschera. This allowed the Home Army to assassinate him. The Home Army also sent Fischer a parcel bomb at the Brühl Palace in March 1943, but he didn't open it. The person who did open it was killed, and someone close to him was injured. The palace was damaged during the Warsaw Uprising, and then its remains were deliberately destroyed by the Nazis on the 19th of December 1944. Fischer also had a villa in the leafy suburb of Konstancin, a property which had formerly belonged to a director of the Pocisk Wertheim company. His homes were furnished with expensive items stolen from the homes of formerly wealthy Poles and included famous works of art. Some of these paintings were given to other Nazis or sent back to the Reich. Some of these pieces still have not been recovered. Fischer behaved in a very confident and stubborn manner, almost entirely with his German and Austrian staff. Fischer's contacts with the Polish population were few, including official delegations. He received the Warsaw Municipal Welfare Council in the autumn of 1941 and again in August and December 1943. He met the Polish mayor of Warsaw alongside some Polish business owners in April 1943 in order for him to make a speech about the necessity of cooperation between Poles and Germans in order to achieve complete victory over Bolshevism. The mayor complained that he had very little authority and suggested releasing prisoners from Auschwitz and Majdanek, which would make it possible to increase the contingent of labour into the Reich. After the meeting, nothing was done. Fischer also met with representatives of the church authorities in Warsaw, and in particular with the priest Zygmunt Kosubski. At one of these conferences in the winter of 1944, Fischer demanded condemnation from the pulpit of the killing of German soldiers. He was told that Christian ethics are against all murders, which included executions of Poles by Germans. Fischer, in turn, did not agree with this position. Fischer then demanded the clergy show their support by sending Polish people to work in the Reich. The response he got was that Poles were treated badly there and received worse food rations than Germans, and did not benefit from spiritual care from the Polish clergy. To clarify these matters, Fischer called an assistant who admitted that indeed German workers did have larger food allocations than Poles and that there were no Polish priests in the Reich. Finally, Fischer demanded a message against Bolshevism. The representatives of the clergy did not agree to this and in turn requested the release of newly arrested priests and monks. Fischer said that this was outside of his competence. The arrestees were in the hands of the SS and police. Ultimately, this conference also ended in nothing. Shortly having received their new jobs, Fischer and Frank met on the 3rd of November 1939. It was at this meeting that they decided to lock up the second largest Jewish population in the world in a ghetto. This decision was made by them alone and without consulting any other municipal authority. For them, this was the central plank of National Socialist policy, and all other considerations were of lesser importance. Towards the end of the war, victory in that war was to be seen as a project of lesser importance too. But for the moment, the Nazis were on top. As early as the 25th of November 1939, Fischer issued an ordinance stating that all Jewish-owned businesses had to be marked as such. This poster informed the public of this requirement. So that there was no confusion as to who was Jewish and who was not, it defined a Jew as being someone whose parents were Jewish and or belonged to the Jewish community as of the 1st of October 1939. In the case of companies, any business that had more than 25% of its capital belonging to Jews was considered Jewish. Offenders who did not comply could be punished with a fine or imprisonment. As this order went into force on the day it was promulgated, there was little chance of taking measures to avoid it. So what was the point of marking Jewish businesses? I think it was to make it an easier target for theft, although of course the Nazis helped themselves to non-Jewish businesses also. A ghetto brought with it all sorts of material benefits, at least for the Nazis. Huge amounts of property would be either available very cheaply or have to be abandoned when the Jews moved into the ghetto. Whereas this plan was supposed to be secret, there were rumours of a ghetto for many months before it actually happened. It took until November 1940 to close off the Jewish ghetto. This poster appeared in the Warsaw district on the 17th of June 1941. Fischer here argues that due to the enclosing of the Warsaw ghetto, cases of epidemic typhus had been kept to a minimum. However, in recent times, the poster claims, there had been cases of the disease which had been caused by wandering Jews. This is the term that is used in the poster. Fischer says that for reasons of public health, that if anyone sees a wandering Jew who has left the ghetto without permission, needs to report that person to the police or other authorities. Failure to do so could result in a fine of up to 10,000 zloty, or in serious cases, even imprisonment. However, the punishment for not reporting a Jew who had left the ghetto got worse. On the 15th of October 1941, Hans Frank issued an order which sentenced to death any Jewish person leaving a ghetto without authorization. Furthermore, any non-Jew who assisted a Jew in the general government to leave the ghetto would also be sentenced to death. This applied not only to Poles, but anyone else within the general government, and could, in theory, also be applied to Germans. On the 10th of November 1941, this poster bearing Fischer's signature appeared. It reads, "Regarding death penalty for illegally leaving the Jewish residential district. Recently, in many documented instances, Jews who have left the residential districts designated for them have spread typhus. To safeguard the population against this dangerous threat, the General Governor has ordered that any Jew who in the future illegally leaves the residential district designated for him will be punished by death. The same punishment will apply to whoever consciously shelters Jews mentioned above, or in any other way assists them, for instance, by providing overnight accommodation, giving them food, giving them a ride in any kind of a vehicle, etc. The sentence will be imposed by the special court in Warsaw. I explicitly draw the attention of the whole population of the Warsaw district to this new regulation, since henceforth it will be applied with merciless severity." And that was signed in Warsaw on the 10th of November 1941. This is a poster put up in the Warsaw ghetto only 1 week later. It lists the names of 8 people who were sentenced to death for leaving the ghetto on the 12th of November 1941, and they were shot on the 17th of November 1941. The purpose was to terrify people in the ghetto, but the only way for most people to find sufficient food to live was by leaving the ghetto and smuggling it in, or having family members smuggle it in, especially small children. It was a question of risking death by shooting, or the almost certainty of slow death by starvation. Typhus was the excuse used by Fischer and others for locking up Jews in the ghettos. Epidemic typhus is spread by lice. It's been recorded since the plague of Athens in the 5th century BCE. In the early modern period, it is often referred to as jail fever. In Russia, as a result of World War I and the Civil War, typhus could have claimed as many as 3 million lives. There were cases of epidemic typhus in Poland in the 1930s. However, the number of cases was a tiny fraction of what it had been during the First World War. However, it was a direct result of Nazi policy that diseases spread in the ghetto. First of all was the massive overcrowding. Several families could be in one room. Secondly, the lack of hygiene facilities and access to water. Thirdly, the poverty, and that people had often had no change of clothes because of this poverty. The people who lived in the ghettos were not just from that town, but there were also tens of thousands of refugees, people forced out of their homes and into the ghettos, often arriving absolutely destitute. That typhus occurred in the ghetto was a deliberate result of the policies of the Nazi regime and Fischer himself. Fischer was in a position to alleviate the situation, but he chose not to do so. In order to frighten the population against Jews, a typhus exhibition was organised in Warsaw. Here we can see Fischer visiting it. The poster suggests that one way to avoid typhus is to avoid crowds. At various ghettos, warning signs were put up referring to typhus. This photograph dates to November 1940 and comes from Warsaw. It is from the time when the ghetto was being enclosed. The sign says, "Area with the risk of typhus. Entry only permitted. Therefore, once inside, one could not leave." This poster was put up by the Nazis and is more specific and directed at the non-Jewish population. It warns that Jews spread epidemic typhus. A vaccine against typhus existed. The first vaccine was somewhat dangerous to produce, but just before the Second World War, another, safer vaccine was introduced. In the Warsaw ghetto, there was a school for nurses, and these nurses, at least in theory, could get vaccinated if they could afford the vaccine. Most people, however, had no recourse to vaccines. Typhus took its deadly toll in the ghetto due to the actions of Ludwig Fischer. Fischer could have improved the food, the medical and employment situation in the ghettos, but he chose not to do so. He is thus directly responsible for the huge number of deaths from starvation and illness in the ghettos. However, he was not responsible for the destruction of the ghettos and the mass murder of the population in the death camps. That was the responsibility of the SS. Fischer may not have liked speaking to Polish Catholics. He liked speaking to Polish Jews even less. He met the president of the Warsaw Jewish Council, Adam Czerniaków, only once. On the 21st of May 1941, Czerniaków went to see Fischer alongside Gustav Wielikowski, who was also a member of the Jewish Council. By this time, starvation was affecting tens of thousands of people in the ghetto. Naked, starved corpses littered the streets as people forced into the ghetto lacked any means of supporting themselves. Fischer told them that his aim was not to starve the Jews, that perhaps food allocations could be increased for the police and Jewish officials. He also stated that the dead bodies on the streets of the ghetto made a bad impression, and with that concluded the conversation. After the mass wave of deportations to death that took place in the summer of 1942, the head of the police and SS in Krakow, Friedrich Krüger, on the 28th of October 1942 ordered that 6 ghettos could continue to function in the Warsaw district. This poster from the 16th of November 1942 is unusual that it does not bear Fischer's name, just his position, and it was not published in German, as though he didn't want Germans to read what was written there. The ghettos that were allowed to stay a little longer were in Warsaw, Kałuszyn, Sobolew, Kosów-Łacki, Rembertów and Siedlce. The people who were imprisoned in these ghettos were mainly deported to Treblinka, where they were murdered, although some were shot and others were sent to Majdanek to be killed. In April 1943, a major revolt broke out in the Warsaw ghetto when the Nazis attempted to deport the remaining people to Treblinka. Fischer would have heard the noise and seen the smoke from the burning ghetto from the Brühl Palace, where he lived and worked, but he had no say in the destruction of the Jews of Warsaw. Once the ghetto was destroyed, its ruins provided a location for the mass shooting of hostages captured on the streets of Warsaw. It was not just helping Jews that could bring about a death penalty. On the 26th of September 1941, Fischer threatened the death penalty or life imprisonment for assisting Soviet prisoners of war. By this time there were tens of thousands of Soviet POWs within the general government, and the Germans did not have the resources to patrol them all. As they were often left to starve, escape for them was the only way that they might find food or even shelter. Fischer was married to Frieda Koblitz and had two daughters. Frieda was the sister of the lawyer Wilhelm Koblitz, who headed the Institute for the German Eastern Work, which was set up by Hans Frank at the University of Krakow in April 1940. This organisation was based in the buildings of the Jagiellonian University in Krakow. Even though they sometimes disagreed on public policy, the two men remained friendly to each other. The wives of both men often travelled together to the ghettos to obtain jewellery, furs and other valuables, taking advantage of the National Socialist terror. Fischer received promotions in the SA. On the 9th of November 1939 he was appointed SA Brigadeführer, and on the 26th of October 1940, on the occasion of the first anniversary of the general government, he was promoted to SA Gruppenführer. On the 25th of April 1941, Fischer's title was changed to Governor. From the 10th of April 1943 to the end of May 1943, Fischer was also acting governor of the Lublin district. The terror in Warsaw was such that on the 29th of August 1943, Fischer ordered his guards to disperse spectators at a football match in Konstantin with aimed shots. Several people were killed. The Governor-General had banned sporting events for Poles. As mentioned earlier, Ludwig Fischer liked to hunt. The Polish resistance realised that it could take advantage of such a trip to eliminate him. An idea was put together by Bolesław Komtrum, alias Żmudzin. The operation was called the Hunt. Fischer went hunting in a convoy of vehicles. The plan of the Poles was to stop the convoy with a steel rope stretched across the road at a height of around 70 centimetres. Once the convoy had been halted, it would be attacked. The area around Wawa to the southeast of Warsaw was chosen as the site of the attack. 40 people from the Zośka battalion were assigned to carry out the action, with 1 heavy machine gun, 1 light machine gun, 22 submachine guns and a lot of grenades. The attack was carried out on the 8th of January 1944 at 1800 hours. The first car in the German column broke through the steel cable. The resistance nonetheless attempted the action anyway and opened fire. 2 Germans were killed and 9 were wounded. One of them was the head of the Schutzpolizei, the Schupo, Krieger. His leg was later amputated. Ludwig Fischer escaped death thanks to the cool thinking and professionalism of his driver, who stepped on the accelerator during the firefight and took his boss to safety. Fischer had survived, but despite the failure of the mission, the Home Army was not disheartened. Just over 3 weeks later, it was to successfully ambush and kill Franz Kuchera, the higher SS and police leader for the Warsaw district. With this attempt to kill him, Fischer may have felt that the net was closing in. The Red Army crossed the former Polish border at the beginning of 1944. Fischer would have realised by now that the good times were coming to an end. He would soon have to deal with not only the Red Army, but also the Polish Home Army at very close range. That is a story I shall deal with in part 2.